What I'd rather not see isn't here. No rope, no black body under a white moon swaying, limp from a tree, no bloody drops of dew on the 21st of March 1981. That's in another photo, like a dozen other photos I've gaped at, not wanting, to turn away from the snap necks of the hanged and the mob's smug smirks, asking myself, how could they? Why? Questions not here, not in this photo. A crisp and tranquil snap. Shot, murder washed out by time, history left uncaptured. What's left now is easier on our eyes. Only pale morning light seeping blue into the sky, and a backdrop to the necks of tree boughs bowing like swans, innocent of any crime, pictured like any other street. Clean sidewalks, no blood. Utility poles strung with wires, no rope. A few pavement cracks, no broken boned body. Why? Which tree was it that shook with his last breath? Easier not to look for it, not to find it, not make ourselves imagine his death. Easier not to look at his eyes shut. Easier to believe the last words on the lips of his murderers must have been, forgive us. To trust this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Stay blind. No rope, no blood, no body. To the life of a boy named Michael, invisible in this photo. That is, until we dare to look hard and deep and long enough.
The poem, Murder on Herndon Avenue by Richard Blanco, echoes the silence of many Americans toward the atrocities experienced by African Americans in this nation's history. The pictures that accompanied the poem were from a time way before my time, but remembering this history is important for each generation. It is important because it is a reminder of what can happen when we sit in silence and allow these actions to happen. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." We do have friends. These friends have joined us today to speak out against racial violence. Our friends come from various groups of goodwill from around the Atlanta area to help the NAACP DeKalb Remembrance Project to not only speak out against racial injustice, but to work toward remembrance and reconciliation. Today, this video is for the many names, known and unknown, the many bodies discovered, and the ones yet to be found. This video is for the many dreams extinguished on the tree limb, and the silence that allowed us not to see them.
I want to start out just having a conversation about why the NAACP decided to do the Remembrance Project and how it came to. We took a trip to Montgomery to visit the EGI Museum. And after we returned from the trip, everyone that was on the trip decided that we had to do more. We had to bring back the memories of victims of lynching. And we wanted to educate the community. So, under the leadership of attorney Dee Smith, we formed the coalition. In this Remembrance Project, there were going to be several activities. One where we were going to bring interfaith community together. One, we were going to engage the youth. We were going to also bring in the government as well as businesses, because we wanted everyone to know the history of the victims of lynching in DeKalb County.
And I tell everybody this is God's project. It's not mine. It's not the NAACP. This project belonged to God because so many miracles happened along the way. When we got back home and we had signed up and sent in all the proposals, people started to contact us. People we would never have met or encountered in any other way. And they contacted us, said, we heard what you're doing, we want to get involved. So we started having monthly meetings and everybody had input what we wanted to do. And EJI, God bless their souls, was so helpful in telling us how we could get it all done.
When we first started, it was going to actually be 2 markers coming to DeKalb County. And we were so proud to actually have one in Lithonia and one in DeKalb County. We were able to connect with more people and found out more history as it relates to victims of lynching in DeKalb County. And we are going to install a third lynching marker in DeKalb County. And so that resonated with me as we went along with the project.
This was God's project. This is God's project. And he just kept on pushing. All we had to do was step back and get out of his way.
They took him off the train they picked him up in Covington. He got on the train in Covington. And the train conductor saw him. He boarded the train in Covington. And the train conductor said, "You look like that man they're looking for in Redan, that raped a woman in Redan." And he said, "No, it wasn't him." And he complained. He said, "But you look like, you fit the description." He held him down, but they had to have planned that, because he didn't let him. When he got up here to Redan, the crowd was already waiting. And they were from Stone Mountain. The main lyncher was Dr. Goldsmith. According to the historical record here, was a Dr. Goldsmith out of Stone Mountain. They were already waiting for him when he got there, got to the Redan station. That crowd mob, led by Goldsmith, Dr. Goldsmith, and another man, that mob pulled him off the train up there, and they said took him a short ways down Shadow Rock to a tree, found a tree that they lynched him in.
Ashe is a word that simply means let it be. The people of West Africa held on to this declaration with the knowledge that the power of whatever is spoken from the tongue will come to fruition and bring about change. For the wisdom to know that no one can do the work of racial justice alone, and that we need community. Ashe.
Lithonia, Georgia is a city growing and creating a safe space for African Americans. They are creating businesses and opportunity for life. When you look at Lithonia, Georgia today, you do not see the violence and hate that was once a part of the city. In the 1890s, things were different, much different. It is recorded that on April 3rd, 1892, 2 black men were walking through the town of Lithonia when white workers from the nearby quarry started to chase them. The white mob chased the 2 men because they were told that these men assaulted a white girl. They did not display any evidence to prove that this was true. Nonetheless, after the mob caught these men, they were then dragged into the Lithonia woods and lynched. Their names known only to God, but thanks to the efforts of the Remembrance Project of the NAACP and its coalition members, the incident of their lynching will long be remembered. A historical marker commemorating their lynching was installed in February of 2021 in the nearby park of the city.
Nowhere in this county is there anything other than these markers honoring the victims of racial terrorism. Now, we had a lot of memorials and markers honoring the people who did the terrorist acts. Some of those are coming down now, but we had nothing honoring, recognizing the victims.
And we just really wanted to do something in the month of February to honor Black history, even though this history is not something that a lot of people may not want to remember, but it's important. It's important to know where we came from. It's important to know what happened to our ancestors. So I bring you greetings from the city of Lithonia today. We're here in the city and we're doing the unveiling of this marker, and we're grateful for the DeKalb County NAACP and all of its partners, all of its elected officials that facilitated this endeavor today.
This marker actually brings a lot of significance to today. Today marks 1 year and 1 day since Ahmaud Arbery was actually murdered. And then 2, we actually today, the House and Senate legislators have produced 50 plus bills that will take us back to a time such as when we were in this era of lynching.
For the testimonies that will be shared long after we're gone, that we weren't bystanders in the fight for racial justice, but that we were harbingers of equity and justice and abundant life for all. Ashe.
Hello, my name is Adrian Carter, and I'm the researcher and archivist for the Druid Hills group of the DeKalb Remembrance Project. The idea of truth as it relates to lynching history is that really it's a history of silences and white complacency, record corruption, and what archival work does is try to break some of that down and uncover it, work it back. Like so many lynching victims, the life and death of Porter Turner are not well documented, and there's very little left of him in the record. Porter Turner was born in the spring of 1895, just outside Greensboro, Georgia, about an hour and a half east of Atlanta. In his mid-20s, he moved to Atlanta's 4th Ward and started a lifelong career in the auto industry. He worked as a mechanic, he worked as a porter, and a driver for Harry Sommers, Inc., which was a Chrysler dealership on Spring Street in Atlanta. And by night, he drove a taxi cab, and he was working, based on the 1940 census, over 60 hours a week to support his family. Almost exactly 2 weeks after the second bomb was dropped on Japan at the end of World War II, and a week before the signing of the surrender and the official end of the war, Atlanta, like New York and like all the Life magazine photos people are familiar with, was celebrating. People were in the streets, people were needing rides. And based on family oral history, we know that he was picking up white passengers as well as black passengers, which at the time was not only against Atlanta city ordinance, but was actively stopped by police. And in the late 40s, there are numerous instances in newspaper archives of harassment and random tickets for black taxi drivers. This was a targeted profession, and that led to his death. It was not only Jim Crow law, it was Atlanta police departments rife with Klansman membership. It was neighborhoods and citizens saying nothing and not reporting murders, lynchings, any number of crimes against black Americans. It was a culture of complacency and silence. The truth is that no one was ever tried, no one was ever interrogated, no one was ever sentenced or held accountable for the lynching of Porter Turner. The black-owned Atlanta Daily World, an important newspaper in American history, was the only news outlet to report anything having happened to Porter Turner. It was the morning after, and is still the most detailed and accurate account we have.
In speaking this truth in this beautiful neighborhood that prides itself on being historic, we're taking a step forward. History is not merely something to be read, and it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. And history is literally present in all that we do.
For the courage of all who want to say and do something to create a more just world. Ashe.
COVID did not stop us. Yeah. Our main focus was to get these markers installed.
My name is Kayla Vinson. I'm an attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative. At EJI, we've spent over 30 years representing clients across the country who are deeply vulnerable to the racial injustice that really defines our criminal justice system. And our legal representation has included clients who are facing the death penalty, people who were sentenced to die in prison as children, formerly incarcerated people who are dealing with the many rules and barriers that we put in place that make it very difficult for them to make a life after being released, and people in prisons and jails all over this country who suffer and endure inhumane conditions of confinement. After 20 years of focusing on courtroom advocacy as a way to help our clients, EJI came to understand that there was just no way that people across the United States had a clear understanding of the history of racial injustice. Because if they did, they would see the ways that what happens to our clients on a daily basis is a legacy and the shadow of slavery, and something that must be rooted out of our society. And so, after our first 20 years, we began to usher in an era of truth and justice, where we've invited local communities to join us in ensuring that our public consciousness, our national memory, is one that is rooted in truth-telling, one that tells the truth about the fact that slavery did not end in 1865, but rather it evolved into new systems of racial hierarchy intended to maintain white economic, social, and political control. After slavery ended, we saw a brief period where the nation had the opportunity to, for the first time, become a democracy. And instead, more than 2,000 Black people were lynched during Reconstruction, the period from 1865 to 1877. And the decision to abandon Black people to the very Confederates who had just waged a war against the country ushered in an even longer period of racial terror lynching from 1877 to 1950, during which more than 4,000 Black people were lynched across this country, often in front of large crowds of white men, women, and children. And this number included at least 593 people lynched in the state of Georgia, and at least 4 lynched right here in DeKalb County. This ceremony is particularly special to me, having grown up in DeKalb County, in a place where I felt and experienced and saw the ways that racial injustice shaped life. But I did not know our local history of racial terror lynching. I didn't know that a lynching happened here as late as 1945, as a world war was being fought against racialized oppression. A Black man was lynched in DeKalb, and a lynching that required the complicity of local law enforcement and state law enforcement and people who were granted impunity even after they had made statements of clear guilt. And so at EJI, we really think that the public narrative that a nation creates about its communities reflects what matters, who matters, what is remembered. And so today, it is a joy to join DeKalb County in unveiling this marker to say no more of this here. That in this community, racialized violence will be remembered and that it must end. DeKalb County is joining a national community of people who are insisting on never again, who are ushering in an era of truth and justice that ideally will identify and name the racial injustice that still exists in this community, so that we can become a place where racial hierarchy does not control outcomes in people's lives. Thank you to the DeKalb County Community Remembrance Coalition, the DeKalb County NAACP, for leading this work and ensuring that the horrors and the racial terror violence that took place here will be remembered in order to meaningfully say, never again.
For the strength to persevere, knowing that though we have come a long way, we have a long way to go. Ashe.
This is blood soil.
When I think about when we first started with the lynching marker, I really didn't know how I was going to feel. And I say that because in the Black community, we never talked about lynching.
And when I sat and I watched the documentaries on it, it was amazing how many people said my parents and my family never discussed it.
Never discussed it.
That's right. That's hurt, right?
Yeah, it really is.
We've really been involved in this project because of you guys. Because until I was contacted at my church, I did not know about this. I did not know about this. My parents, I was the youngest of 9, and they were very protective of me. And they never mentioned this to me. They talked about a whole lot of things, but not this. And I want to thank you guys.
If you were to ask someone what happened to one of our ancestors, they would never say someone was lynched. They would say they killed him. And so that resonated with me as we went along with the project.
This is blood soil. As close to the actual site as we can get. When it happened, that whole area around the depot was like these woods. But now it's a subdivision or subdivisions, and we can't go on private property without permission of the owners. Now this is public property. So, and it's just like the area was when
Mr. Hudson was killed. So that's why we're collecting this soil. We'll take it and prepare it. By preparing it, I mean we have to sift it, sift out all the stems and the leaves and the roots and the rocks and the clumps. We sift out all of that, and what we're left with is pure soil. And that soil will be jarred. We'll put it in the jar. We're going to send one to EJI. There will be one that will go to the DeKalb History Center. One has been given to the family members. One thing that was so moving, when we had the soil collection in one of the locations connected to the death of Mr. Turner, it was just so moving to see his great-grand nieces and nephews there helping to dig the soil where their uncle died.
Hello, I'm Becky Evans, State Representative for House District 83. The sickness of racism and white supremacy is an American condition. Racism and white supremacy is a part of our culture. We must heal this sickness at every level of our culture, including legislatively. I'm proud that the Georgia legislature passed a hate crimes bill in 2020, and this past week that we repealed the citizens arrest law, a 158-year-old law that was designed for citizens to arrest runaway slaves. I'm proud to read to you House Resolution 1406, which was entered into the record for the state of Georgia in March of 2020. A resolution memorializing the 4 known victims of lynching in DeKalb County, Georgia, and honoring the work of the Remembrance Project initiative of the NAACP DeKalb Branch, which seeks to recognize and memorialize incidents of racial terrorism perpetuated throughout the United States and in DeKalb County. Whereas, between 1877 and 1950, racial terror lynchings of African Americans by white mobs in DeKalb County created a climate and a legacy of violence and injustice that has not been previously acknowledged in DeKalb County. Whereas, on the night of August 21st, 1945, Porter Flournoy Turner was operating a white-owned passenger cab. On the morning of August 22nd, his body was discovered on the lawn of a physician's home in Druid Hills. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and back. His cab was found abandoned on the curb across the street. And whereas Mr. Turner's death was classified as an unsolved homicide until June of 1946, when it was announced that informants working with the Attorney General of the state of Georgia had witnessed members of the Cavalier Club, the strong arm of the Ku Klux Klan, tasked with terroristic raids, boasting of the killing during a covert meeting. No one was ever arrested for the lynching of Porter Turner. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives that the members of this body memorialize the 4 known victims of lynching in DeKalb County, Georgia, and honor the work of the Remembrance Project initiative of the NAACP DeKalb Branch.
What we did at the beginning of this project was the spiritual glue that held the group together. My area of expertise is community organizing and coalition building. So the work of creating this, of creating a truth and a reconciliation and a personal sense of restoration and restorative justice amongst the leaders, and therefore amongst their organizations, and therefore in the communities, is the critical work. And there are any number of opportunities for individuals to break bonds, to argue, to be offended, to respond to being offended, and to offend again. Dealing with racial matters, particularly in the United States, we're talking trauma. We're talking the results of years and years of racial terrorism. And so the first part of the reconciliation process is to exercise the principles of reconciliation with the leaders, with the people who are trying to accomplish something that affects society as a whole. And so we had to begin there. At the beginning, the NAACP was able to bring together a wonderful group of people with good intentions and what was a very clear and unified mission, and to ensure that that stayed that way and even developed into something longer and more enduring. It was necessary to model amongst us what we were trying to develop and spirit into the rest of our community. The leaders agreed to do 2 sessions, 2 4-hour-long sessions, to gather about 40 people together who were at the core of this mission, at the core of this coalition, who represented 5, 6, 7 different entities, different communities, different racial makeup, different class makeup, to bring them together and to discuss some of the hard issues of culture and imagery and coalition building.
That we all look alike, that we can't swim.
So that we are racists, that we are rich, that we are white supremacists.
Out of it came a camaraderie and some tears, a lot of hugs, a lot of personal owning of not just what I may have done or my neighbor may have done to offend you, but what you may have done in response to that offended me. And perhaps most importantly, in the context of this remembrance work, is an ownership for what our ancestors did. The process of acknowledging that and bridging that was the primary outcome of these sessions.
We need to come to grips with this race problem in our country. I don't know if this will do it. I doubt seriously if it will. But each step closer to telling the truth gets us closer to getting some kind of reconciliation, understand that we're all American.
We have been so silent for so long, it's just not going to be the case going forward. And we can't do it. We got to teach them the right way so that they can actually be productive for us too.
Honestly, I think a lot of people my age don't really see the need to have reconciliation because there's no longer segregation, and the racism that our ancestors and people before us went through, we don't have to deal with today. So a lot of people my age are just like, it is what it is, I like who I like. And that's fine to a certain extent, and we can thank the people in the past for that. But the job is not over. So what that would look like for us is just seeing a better world, seeing a world where people our age, especially black people our age, only pretty much, aren't shot down and have all these prejudices. I just remember today, I had to look in the mirror and make sure I was like, okay, I want to wear this, but I don't want to look like a thug. I want to dress nice. And so stuff like that, prejudices and all the rest of that, a life change can be seen from a young person's perspective if we tackle reconciliation the right way.
White people cannot rely on black people to be trying to tell the truth. It has to be a joint effort of opening our eyes and accepting the past so that we can, and going through the pain of the past and the painful part of it for white people as well as black people so that we can all be transformed and move ahead in our society.
If not for the Equal Justice Initiative, even those of us who study history may not have uncovered the details of what happened right in our own neighborhoods. I live out here. I pass by where Mr. Hudson was killed almost every single day. I drive by there. I would never have known that had happened at Chatterock, that these people lived, they were loved, they had a life. So these memorial plaques will be a testament to history. They were not forgotten.
Just like the Tulsa Massacre, nobody talked about it. And you need to talk about things. And, you know, supposedly your history, you're supposed to learn it so you don't repeat it, and all we do is repeat it.
Some will say wait until the right moment. Others will say let's wait until we have all the resources before we move forward. There's always a reason not to start. I've decided that I will do what I can, when I can, where I can, to ensure injustice runs screaming from the face of the earth. I may not be able to push that big boulder up the hill by myself. However, if enough of us push together, we can move mountains.
And to bring us into the present, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Ann Sayre, Presbyterian minister, Presbyterian pastor, retired, and Tom Woodward of the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. They will lead us in a prayer of apology by white Americans to African Americans. Would those of you who self-identify as white, and for some that could be a difficult decision, but if you feel you can identify as white tonight to make the apology, please rise as you are able.
We acknowledge that white people colonized the United States of America and founded a nation on principles of exploitation of peoples and resources, including economic and social inequality, and the horror and abuse of genocide, slavery, and racial terrorism. We remember the violent racial acts that have taken place in our nation's past, and we recognize their continued effect on racial relationships in the present day and time. And we are determined to be a reconciled community of racial harmony. As a white-skinned person, I am a cultural descendant of office and benefit from opportunities, social and economic inequalities, and other forms of privilege, which they institutionalize into systems of education. I have the responsibility and right to stand in the place of my ancestors, to offer on their behalf a prayer of reconciliation and apology to the victims then and today of racial terrorism in all its forms.
Dr. King wrote that this hour in history needs a dedicated circle of transformed nonconformists. He goes on, the saving of our world from pending doom will come not from the action of an adjusted majority, but from the creative maladjustment of a transformed minority. This hour in history needs a dedicated circle of transformed nonconformists. And I say tonight, to all those who are gathered, to those who watch now on television and through social media, you are the transformed minority. You are the transformed nonconformists. And I say thank you to the leaders, to the organizations, to Chairwoman Smith and to President Hardy, to all who have called us together in poetry and in song, in testimony, in words, in prayers, in hopes, in commitments we will make, and in our deep breathing, in our soul connections to the earth.
This poem is in remembrance of veterans who fought in the war of Black existence. These martyrs we now call soil give life to saplings who no longer have to dangle Black bodies as commodity for white entertainment. This poem is for what white folk call Mother Nature, but Black folk call unmarked burial grounds. This poem is for Reuben Hudson. This poem is for Porter Turner. This poem is for untitled bodies who can only find home in the roots of dying oak trees. This poem is a prayer for the living Black bodies carved into crater but somehow still breathing. Did you know him? Mrs. Bush, his name was Reuben? Or did you only care about naming your non-existent screams? Your hunting squad, aimed and ready to kill all Negro-looking things. Did you know, Mrs. Bush, that he was the son of African kings, future father of queens you deem unholy before their upbringing, Mrs. Bush? Did you fear his skin or his courage to wear it, Mrs. Bush? Do you remember what they said that day? Frail, defenseless, all synonyms for white right. Do you know what they called him? Brutal, threatening, all synonyms for black right. His name was Reuben Hudson. His name was Reuben Hudson. His name was Reuben Hudson. His name was Porter Turner. Killed by white knights with no honor, white capes with strong sonar to track black dragons who dare to live without fear of being slain. They call our roots ravenous and our ebony a felony, but they can never capture our culture. Our Africa rained into us with the precision of the sharpest needle. Today, we take off our blindfolds to a history erased as fiction. Today, we bow our heads toward Georgia clay stained red by black innocence. Today, we honor the veterans of a war that still rages on from sea to shining sea.
It just lets us know today and going forward, we need to stay woke. We need to be engaged. We need to make sure that we read upon our history so we know where we've been and where we're actually going. We must be bold in understanding that we belong here and our lives, black lives, truly matter.
We have had a chance to hear the stories of African Americans that were killed by angry mobs of racial terrorists. The memorial plaques in downtown Decatur, Druid Hills, and Lithonia will serve as a reminder and a marker into the future. The interfaith group has partnered with the NAACP DeKalb to bring some reconciliation to that past. I will use these markers as a reminder to tell my children and grandchildren so that they can pass on these stories to their grandchildren, to fight for the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. We will remember because our future depends on it.